We lock our doors, turn on the lights, and tell ourselves that the sounds in the dark are just the house settling. But deep down, we know the truth. Sometimes the horror isn't in our heads. Tonight, we dive into 4 deeply unsettling true accounts from people who realized too late they weren't alone. From a baby monitor capturing something malicious in Italy to a desperate childhood prayer that answered with fire. These stories will make you question what's lurking right outside your door. Stick around for the 3rd story. It will completely change the way you look at the woods. Let's begin. We laughed about our haunted apartment until this morning. My husband and I always joked about our household ghost. We thought open doors and moving chairs were funny. Until the morning our baby monitor cut to black and the room filled with the smell of old cigarettes. My husband and I moved into an old apartment in Italy nearly 2 years ago. We've often joked about our household ghost because of various harmless experiences we've had, such as doors being wide open in the morning that weren't open when we went to sleep, and heavy chairs being pulled out from under the dining room table that had been neatly tucked away the night before. The worst of it was our downstairs neighbors constantly asking us to stop stomping around at midnight when they are trying to sleep. But here is the catch. The room in our apartment that corresponds directly with their bedroom is completely empty and used solely for storage. However, what I experienced today has left me absolutely terrified. We had a baby girl just 4 months ago, and she is absolutely amazing in every way. Lately, she has developed a habit of smiling and laughing at empty spaces, but we put that down to just normal baby things. This morning, she was sleeping peacefully while I was reading a book in the living room, keeping a close eye on her through the baby monitor. The calm and silence was suddenly shattered by the piercing "no connection" alert on the monitor. At first I assumed there must have been a common power cut, but my reading light was still on. As I reached the living room door, my baby let out the most harrowing, bone-chilling scream I've ever heard in my life. It genuinely made me feel nauseous. I sprinted to the bedroom and scooped her up out of the cot. The moment I stepped inside, I felt this hideous, suffocating weight in the air, and the entire room smelled heavily of stale cigarettes. All the hair on my body stood on end. It was only then I noticed the camera hadn't just lost power. It had been physically clicked off. I've searched the apartment 3 times for an intruder, but everything is locked. The smell is gone, but the terror remains. It's terrifying when the one place you feel safe, your home, turns against you. But imagine being trapped inside your room, hearing someone trying to get in, while your own instinct tells you that opening the door means certain doom. Just like this next account, someone knocked at 4 a.m., and my dogs stayed silent. When someone knocks on your door at 4 a.m., you expect panic. You expect a crisis. But when the knocking is slow, calm, and perfectly timed, and your guard dogs don't make a single sound, that's when you know you're in severe danger. I've explained all of this to my parents, and they just think I'm losing my mind. I've had experiences twice now, and while I don't know if it's reality or paranoia, this first time was undeniably real. I was sitting in my room around 4 in the morning watching a movie. It was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark on a streaming service. I wasn't particularly scared by the film, but as I lay there, the heavy silence of the night was broken by a distinct knocking on our front door. I knew exactly which door it was, because all the doors in our old house are made of completely different materials. I froze, completely paralyzed with fear. Then the knocking came again. Slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and started texting a friend, telling him someone was outside. He tried to rationalize it, saying it was probably just the neighbor kids who always hang out with my little brother. But there was no way. It was 4 a.m. If neighbor kids came over at that hour, they would be pounding on the door in panic, not calmly knocking. I was trapped. I literally couldn't move my body out of pure terror. To make matters worse, right next to that front door is our kitchen, which features 3 massive uncovered windows. Anyone standing outside can look right through them and see almost the entire layout of the house. If I left my room to check, I would be instantly exposed to whoever was waiting in the dark. I heard the knocking a good 3 or 4 times before it finally faded away. The worst part? We had 2 dogs. One of them barks at absolutely everything: the washing machine, the stove clicking, a passing shadow. But that night, neither dog made a single sound. My mind instantly went to the darkest place possible. Had someone silenced them before knocking? The dark corners of an old house are terrifying, but at least there are walls to protect you. What happens when you leave civilization entirely, hiking deep into the mountains where nobody can hear you scream, only to realize that something is circling your tent in the dead of night? Let's go to Lake Wenatchee. The voice circling our tent at Lake Wenatchee. When my friend Travis and I pitched our tent deep in the heavily wooded ridges of Washington State, we wanted an adventure. We didn't expect a fast-moving, distorted human voice to circle our tent at 3 a.m., getting closer and closer with every single breath. A long time ago, a thing happened to me that I simply cannot explain. I've kept it quiet because I can't stand the way people try to rationalize it or flat out call me a liar. I was 22 at the time, and my friend Travis and I were camping at my family's vacation property near Lake Wenatchee in Washington State. Feeling adventurous, we decided to hike deep up into the steep, heavily wooded hills to spend our second night out in the true wilderness. We hiked for about 2 hours at a brutal pace, navigating by map and compass until we found a flat clearing about 150 yards across. Knowing the basic rules of the backcountry, we pitched our tent right in the center, as far from the eerie tree line as possible. We were stone cold sober, exhausted, and fell asleep the moment the sun went down. Hours later, I woke up abruptly to the sound of Travis rustling around. He was sitting perfectly rigid, his neck craned, listening intensely. When I asked what was wrong, he urgently shushed me. "Don't you hear that?" he whispered, his voice shaking violently. We sat in absolute silence. Then I heard it. A distant sound that resembled a human voice. I tried to convince myself it was just a coyote a few hundred yards away, but then a second sound echoed from the exact opposite side of the clearing. This time it was unmistakably a human voice, and it sounded like it was taunting us. It transitioned into a low, intimidating warning cadence, circling the edge of the clearing. It moved incredibly fast, yet there were absolutely no footsteps audible on the brush. It cut out intermittently, and each time it returned, it was closer to the tent. When it sounded no more than 15 feet away, adrenaline took over. I unzipped the tent, jumped out with my pocket knife raised, and screamed into the bright moonlight. There was absolutely nothing there. We stood outside, drenched in sweat, watching the tree line until the sun finally rose. Some entities stalk us in the wilderness, but others are summoned by our deepest, darkest moments of despair. Our final story proves that words, and even silent thoughts, carry a terrifying amount of power, especially when a child screams into the universe for help. My silent prayer answered with a devastating fire. As a first grader in foster care, I was brutally targeted by older inner-city bullies every single day. One morning after a horrific beating, I looked up at the sky and screamed from the bottom of my soul for help. I didn't care who was listening. A few days later, the universe answered. When I was a child, I spent a lot of time in foster care, but there were brief windows where my mother would regain custody of me for months at a time. She was rarely around, so as a small child in the first grade, I had to walk completely alone to and from school. If I wasn't protected by my group of friends from the foster home, the older, bigger inner-city kids would track me down and beat me up relentlessly until I reached school or my apartment. I didn't tell a soul. I genuinely thought telling an adult would only make the abuse worse. It wasn't until one morning, after being terrorized from my doorstep all the way into the halls of my classroom, that something inside me completely snapped. I remember looking up at the wide open blue sky during recess and just mentally screaming. I couldn't take the pain anymore. I didn't know what God was, and I didn't understand the concept of prayer. I just blared my soul into the universe as loud as a desperate, broken child could. I asked for help from anyone who was listening. I went back home later that day thinking nothing of it. Life went on as usual. But later that same week, at around 2 a.m., I woke up abruptly to my mother forcing me awake in a panic. She dragged me outside into the freezing air and my jaw dropped. A blazing, violent fire was consuming the opposite side of our apartment building. Monstrous flames were shooting directly out of my bully's apartment. The next morning, I opened our front door to see the charred, blackened remains of our hallway. The fire had miraculously incinerated every single apartment in the complex, stopping directly at our door. I never told my family, but deep down, I knew. Words have power, and a desperate soul's prayer can shift reality in the most terrifying ways. 4 terrifying stories, each leaving behind questions that science can't fully answer. The fire that stopped at a single door, the voice with no footsteps, the silent guard dogs, and the baby monitor turned off by unseen hands. Which of these accounts sent the biggest chill down your spine? If you encountered the fast-moving voice deep in the woods of Lake Wenatchee, what would you have done? Let me know your survival strategy in the comments below. Smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the dark. Stay safe out there, and remember, look behind you before you close your eyes tonight.